This is big news. This is the first member of the president's cabinet to be interviewed by Robert Mueller. Several hours it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's significant, but I think it was inevitable, right? Both because of Attorney General's role as Attorney General and with the dismissal of Comey, but also his role on the campaign. And so, clearly he was a key figure that the Mueller team needed to speak to. I think, this is not out of the ordinary in any form or fashion. And honestly, I think Raj Shah probably said it best from the White House's perspective. I think this is an indication that they're getting to the end of this investigation.
Really? Do you see it that way, Marie?
Well, there are some key things that have to happen first, though. And we've talked about the fact that President Trump very well may have to be interviewed by Bob Mueller. Until that happens, this is not wrapping up, I think. So we'll see. There are other key officials who have not been spoken to yet. I think Vice President Pence will probably have to as well. This will go on for many months. I think at this point, these things take time. Jeff Sessions is at the middle of a lot of this. And as we all have talked about when he went before Congress, several times now, he has misremembered some things. He's had to clarify some statements about conversations with Russians. So it is not at all surprising that Bob Mueller would have had hours and hours of questions for Jeff Sessions, given his role, given what he said publicly about this.
But the entire reason why there's been a lot of controversy surrounding Jeff Sessions' recusal of himself from the Russia investigation, he's been heavily criticized by the president for doing so. The entire reason why he did that is precisely because of this. He did not believe he could be in charge of a Russia investigation and also be a witness at the same time. So it's important to point that out. In terms of when this is going to be over, we don't know. I mean, 6 months ago, the White House was saying that it's almost over, it's wrapping up. I think that's probably their way of trying to say we want it to wrap up soon. But none of us actually know who they're still going to interview, what exactly is going to happen, what charges may or may not be filed. We just don't know.
I spoke with Mercedes Schlapp earlier, strategic communications for the White House, and she didn't seem to hint that it was at the end she could only respond that they're fully cooperating and continuing on with the investigation.
Yeah, if the White House is playing its cards the way it has been, and so far it's been a neutral deck, which is where they want to be. They don't want to make news on what they think.
No, that's right.
They really don't want to jump the shark on this. And Mueller is helping them out by digging deeper and talking with people, because if it takes forever to get to the bottom of this, it only hurts the White House, no matter what the end game is, because you want to be able to focus on different things.
Yeah, look, I think clearly in any investigation, you don't start with the big fish, right? You probably wait for the Attorney General and the President of the United States until you get towards the end of it. So I think, look, we don't know. I think you're right. We don't know exactly when it all wraps up. But I do think it's probably an encouraging sign that they're now into the big fish, right? Jeff Sessions is clearly a central player in a lot of these. And if they can answer those questions, they probably are.
Yeah, a big fish, though, big fish who recused himself, though, can be complicated, because the president was not happy about that.
Yeah.
And the fact that if he was avoiding things to get to this point, how did he know he was going in this way? How did he suddenly, only the person who knew all of the facts would know that those facts would collide with the investigation.
Well, Jeff Sessions would argue, at least the Justice Department would argue, that he knew as soon as this investigation, or the surrounding investigations in Congress that came before the special counsel, the specific questions were about the campaign. And he was one of the very first senators to jump onto the Trump campaign. So inevitably, all of the questions surrounding the campaign, he would have to answer. And being in that position, legally, ethically, he believed that he had to recuse himself and couldn't be a witness in the case.
If he hadn't had a collision, though, of his memory and what happened with meetings, so on and so forth, in that very first hearing, how could he have even known where we would be today? That's the unfortunate part. That's the part that I believe probably chides the White House and the president. As they've said, they're not happy about the fact that he had to do that recusal.
Well, and that was his own doing. I mean, you're right, Harris. I remember, there wasn't a big push for recusal until it came out that he had not remembered fully when he testified before Congress. But the special counsel is basically looking at two things. One is whether there was collusion with Russia, and one is whether there was obstruction of justice in firing Jim Comey. Sessions is really at the center of both of those. And he's unique in that because he was part of the campaign and part of the decision-making when they got rid of Comey.
You know what's ironic, though?
It's interesting.
Look at the situation where Mueller is with his employees around him having, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, having, oh, goodness gracious, what did I do with those thousands of text messages?
Right, I can't remember where I put them.
The same thing that you were maybe accusing, back in the day of the Secret Server with Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's very troubling for Mueller right now. He's in kind of an awkward position. So it's interesting to see that juxtaposed with, the AG now going to talk with him. It's just an observation.
The way that the questions were asked during the hearings with Jeff Sessions, he was accused of meeting with the Russian ambassador. When we dug a little deeper, we found out he actually was meeting with multiple people at an event at the RNC convention. It doesn't count as a private meeting. And so the way the questions
But you should have said that then.
But the questions were framed as, did you meet with so-and-so? And he said no. And then it was framed in the narrative as, well, you did meet with him because you happened to have a quick conversation with him at a random RNC convention meeting. And so the definition of what exactly the meeting was has been changed multiple times.
There was more than one meeting. There was one before President Trump's foreign policy speech that he gave in Washington. There was one which was private. There was one at the RNC, and there were other conversations. So again,
what does it have to do with collusion?
Well, but then
I don't know, but you have to answer the question correctly when they ask you.
Exactly, you have to answer the question.
It may have nothing to do with collusion. And so far, the evidence shows that it has nothing to do with collusion. But when somebody asks you, you do have to answer.
But if you ask the question, did you meet with him privately versus did you meet him at all? I mean, I've met with multiple people in a group setting that I maybe wouldn't remember. If you're asking specifically about a meeting with the Russian ambassador, then that's different.
Josh, one last word to you.
Well, look, I think all of this, the fact that we don't have this all even sorted out on the couch, probably is uncomfortable as it is. I think Jeff Sessions made the right decision to recuse himself in here. Yeah, and I think he's probably in a position today to clear this all up and actually for the betterment of the Trump administration as a result of it.